In this chapter review, I'll be going through why Kuma will be returning to Egghead Island and why Kizaru will be switching sides against Saturn and the world government. So without any further delay, let's get right into this. The chapter begins with a flashback occurring at Egghead before it was built into the technologically advanced island it is now. Kizaru had been sent over by the world government to oversee the deal between Kuma and Vegapunk under Saturn's authority, the man titled Warrior God of Science and Defense. Since this arc revolves around science and technology, it's clear why Saturn plays a strong role in all of this. He seems to be the one giving direct orders to Vegapunk as the person keeping him on a leash, just like he was intending to do with Kuma. Considering Vegapunk's past involvement with Mads, a group that included the likes of Caesar, Queen and Vince McJudge, it's clear why Saturn felt like he had to keep a close eye on Vegapunk, hence the possible snail camera hidden in this chapter watching on as the scene plays out. Kizaru outed Vegapunk for his silly habits of making shady deals with pirates, which seems to be a constant problem. Vegapunk puts his ideas ahead of the restrictions in place, unwilling to bend to any rules that could get in the way of his genius. He can sacrifice his morals to a certain degree, but he won't back down when a genius idea of his is rejected. Side note, but I couldn't help notice Drake was also present at the island, meaning Kizaru is aware of Drake's allegiance to the Navy and has been since Sabaody as well, and so it means Kizaru has to be aware of the sword faction of the Marines. And so maybe Akainu is also aware of the group and may even be the head of the organization as a direct counter to the Gorosei who constantly work behind his back, disrespecting him. Back to the chapter now. Saturn ripped straight into Vegapunk's silly idea of using Kuma, a man known as a revolutionary and a tyrant, as the main candidate for his cloning plans as the next advanced weapons to be used by the world government. All of Vegapunk's plotting was for naught if someone like Kuma, who had been a part of an organization plotting on the downfall of the world government, was going to be the face of the project. In fact, the entire idea is a mockery in Saturn's eyes. Saturn, however, proposes one of many things we wondered why Kuma had accepted in the first place, ever since of learning of his ties to the revolutionaries. His unwillingness to disobey the world government, and why later on in Marineford, we find out that he has no free will or personality left, fighting those that were closest to him. He had been given a chance for his deal to be honoured under 3 conditions: to become a warlord, in order to undo all the bad rep he had as a pirate and a former revolutionary, so that he can show the world that he is a force for the world government. The second was to be turned into a weapon himself, and enhanced in order to be used by the government as well. And finally, to make sure nothing would go wrong and that it could never backfire against the world government, Saturn had ordered for Kuma to lose his free will and his mind in the process. This process would be a long one and not one that would occur immediately, but rather over time as Vegapunk continued his works on him, constantly modifying him. This is why over time throughout the story we had been seeing Kuma from Thriller Bark to Sabaody to then the return of Sabaody where he's protecting the ship, to then Marineford we can see that drastic change in his personality. At first he's able to communicate, then later on in Marineford it had seemed he was acting without any free will of his own in comparison to the previous arcs where he would act on his own, like he had done so when defying the world government by saving the very people that had attacked the celestial dragons from Kizaru. Small details like this make me certain of Kizaru changing his mind at Egghead later on. Knowing now that Kizaru and Kuma knew each other fairly well explains why Kuma wasn't punished for saving the Straw Hats, and in fact the reason for him being punished anyway and turned into a slave for the celestial dragons was due to the command he had asked Vegapunk to install in him before losing his free will, which was to protect Luffy's ship over the 2-year time skip, which of course would have exposed his defiance regardless of any report Kizaru could have made. Kuma's will to protect Luffy's ship further proves Kuma sees Luffy as Nika, and soon Kizaru will too after coming to understand why Kuma went to such lengths to protect him and his crew. A reminder of what Mihawk told us about Luffy himself, the simple ability to turn those around him into his allies. The idea that Kuma had an order programmed into him as a request of his own prior to losing his own free will also makes me believe there is another request he had asked for before losing his free will entirely, and I'm certain Vegapunk accepted it, and I'll be coming back to that later. Vegapunk of course was fine with the first 2 choices, with Kizaru also entertaining the idea of Kuma being a weapon for the government. Upon hearing the final request however, Vegapunk simply could not accept it, since in his eyes and anyone else's, it would mean death. Having to lose both free will and your very mind would mean to exist as a walking corpse and your body to be used even after you're no longer conscious, committing acts of violence against anybody that he's ordered to do so. In short, the process would be killing him. From the gentle Kuma who practices pacifism to the cyborg weapon of mass destruction for the government, one could see why there would be a possibility he too would even make a little rebuttal against the deal. But the reality was as we expected from him, honouring the promise he had made worth anything and he would be willing to pay the price with his own dignity, honour and his own morals. This is shown to us when he says he'd be willing to make a deal with the devil himself to kill Bonnie, a phrase that meant so much for someone as God-loving as he was and had spent so much time in the church. This statement in particular intrigues me, since there may be a possibility that devils and demons actually exist in the One Piece world, and I'll be going into further detail in my next video hopefully. His entire backstory shows us why he would ride so hard to make sure he would put Bonnie before his own self. He knows how it feels to suffer as a child and wants Bonnie to have the childhood he never had himself. Not just that, but it's simply a characteristic of Kuma to always put the feelings of others before his own self. How a backstory can shape a character is quite nice to see. Both Kuma and Dofi suffered the torture at the hands of others. Dofi at the hands of the common people and Kuma at the hands of the Celestials, which led them onto different paths. Kuma wanted to free people from Celestials, whilst Dofi wanted to enslave people, possibly due to a burning hatred in his heart for the common people that had tortured him, as we see later on in Dressrosa. Thankfully for Bonnie's sake, Kuma didn't turn out that way. Kuma's tears of joy upon hearing Bonnie had an actual chance of being cured was probably the most heart-wrenching yet favourite panel of mine in the arc so far. A reminder that Bonnie's life meant so much more to him than his own free will, showing us the type of character he is, considering he was just someone who had always fought so hard to achieve freedom, whether for himself or for others. And now here he was, willing to give up that same freedom he had fought so hard to attain, to return to being the same slave he once was. To make matters worse than they already were, Saturn proposed an even harsher condition upon the final one he had made Kuma accept. Bonnie would have to remain a hostage of the world government until his personality was completely erased, meaning Kuma and Bonnie would never be reunited. This makes Vegapunk furious, knowing the implications of such a condition. Saturn did threaten to make Bonnie a slave as well if Kuma was to defy him or go against the deal, making Kuma tremble at the mere thought of that possibility, promising to never contact Bonnie again once it was all over, but in exchange only asked that Bonnie was ignorant of the fact that she was a hostage and Saturn actually accepted those terms. As the chapter continues, we see both Kuma and Bonnie undergo the changes together over the years, with both spending their last moments together in lab, instead of travelling the world together like they had deserved, and sadly from what it seems, that chance may never arise. Whilst Kuma and Bonnie are being worked on by Vegapunk, we see the mad scientist have his eureka moment about creating Vegapunk clones we see on Egghead Island in present day to help him split up the multiple tasks he has to complete at once. The interesting part about this is that he had only mentioned 5 bodies, whereas the number prior to Shaka's death was 6, excluding Dr. Vegapunk himself. I've seen a few claims of those that have read the chapter that Shaka wasn't a body of Vegapunk and that he was a hidden character due to the mask he wears in comparison to the other characters. Something worth pointing out is that we've seen all the other Vegapunks but him show off extreme signs of intelligence during the arc, including York. We assumed she was there simply to be the person eating for the other Vegapunks when she's just as capable as the others, holding them off for the passcode that took 3 other Vegapunks working together to crack. The only one who we haven't seen doing anything showing signs of extreme intelligence is in fact Shaka, who instead shows clear signs of leadership and doesn't really fit the mold of the other Vegapunks. Back to the chapter now, and we see Kuma, Bonnie, Vegapunk, Sentomaru and Kizaru spending a lot of time together and even eating alongside each other during this period of time. Kizaru is seemingly placed to overwatch the progress under Saturn's orders, and even later on in the story, we see the pacifistas used by him during Sabaody for the first time. We see why Sentomaru put his own life on the line as well to protect Bonnie, someone who he had grown close to over the period of her staying at Egghead. In this panel, we see the famous Nika dance, a dance that we had first seen in the story during Skypiea when the Straw Hats were celebrating, a dance that Kuma's father had shown him, and now we see Kuma passing down these same traditions onto others, like a preacher telling the wonders of Nika. Maybe the Bible he carries has Nika as a savior in their religion, and Kuma is from a bloodline of disciples of Nika who had witnessed his works. This is probably why Saturn hates the clan so much. Just like Kuma's own father preached the wonders and joys of Nika, Kuma is doing the same, preaching of his own religion. Kizaru also dancing implies a great chance of him switching sides in this arc, and it becomes increasingly unbelievable that he won't. Kizaru is the user of the light fruit, and for that light to be used for the forces of darkness, especially in the fight against his own friends, is impossible in my eyes. Luffy may have knocked some sense into Kizaru, with him wanting to wait a little longer. When he stands up, he will have to make his decision, whether that be to use his power for good or to continue using it for the forces of evil. Kizaru has shown us that his sense of justice is one that constantly changes based on his own feelings, in comparison to the type of justice of either Akainu or Aokiji, both fixed in their resolve. Kuma preaching the tales of Nika may be something playing on Kizaru's mind. Originally, he may have just passed it off as nothing but an old tale and enjoyed the story, but seeing Luffy up close in action may have him think otherwise. Something is still holding him back, and I believe both Kuma and Luffy will show him which path is the righteous one, freeing him from the shackles of darkness. Kizaru is unaware of his sense of justice and goes off on a whim without direction, so Luffy will have to be the one to guide him and use that light for good instead of evil. And with Kuma's return to protect his own daughter, Kizaru will have no choice but to act, being reminded of all the sacrifices Kuma was made to do under the unreasonable orders of Saturn, who had now broken his promise and harmed Bonnie, who was still just a child. Coming back to the reason why I had worked on this video in the first place was why I believe Kuma will return, and the answer is pretty simple. Kuma from when we last saw him was running around from place to place, seemingly unaware of where he was going. From escaping Dragon at Goa Island, to then climbing up towards Merijua, where the celestial dragons reside, and then running straight past Akainu who was still attacking him. It seems to me that maybe Kuma is in fact aware of his target, and that person is Saturn. It may be possible Kuma asked Vegapunk to give him one final instruction, to kill Saturn, the moment Bonnie was hurt badly. So from assuming Kuma's next destination will be Egghead in an attempt to save his daughter and take out the person who had broken their end of the bargain when it came to his daughter's safety, it also links to why I said Kizaru will be switching sides, because now if Kuma were to join in the fight, carrying this much injury, I very much doubt he can deal much damage. Now if Kizaru, however, was to see his resolve once more added on to the fighting spirits of Vegapunk and Sentomaru, as well as all the other Straw Hats who had just met Vegapunk in comparison to Kizaru, who had known him for a long time, I don't see why Kizaru wouldn't join in as well, helping them take a stand against the ongoing injustice. Kizaru taking a stand against someone of Saturn's capability will give the Straw Hats a fighting chance against him. Maybe then Vegapunk would be protected by Kizaru, and then Bonnie could possibly stay with them to be protected once Kuma dies after all the fighting, as a final request to Vegapunk. Maybe this time at the end of the arc we won't see a usual feast or party, and at the end of the arc we may just see a sad goodbye and departure. Or maybe we see the defeat of Saturn at the hands of Kuma, Kizaru and Luffy all working together, and then after Kuma's sacrifice there will be a celebration, just like we saw at Skypiea, but this time to celebrate the great life of Kuma once more, with everyone doing the Nika dance. At the time of recording this video, chapter 1101, 2 and 3 have all come out, already showing us more of Kuma's journey and an even stronger tie to Luffy. It is apparent, however, that he is indeed already dead and has been since the Marineford arc. His final action will be to fight Saturn and ultimately self-destruct in the process, or maybe the self-destruct sequence has already begun, which is why he wasted no time running away from Dragon without explanation. Not only that, but the recent chapters do shed a light on why Akuma wanted to protect the Straw Hat ship, and it was indeed for Luffy's sake, betting on him to be Nika, or rather someone that could be another Nika. Let's hope that he gets this win in the bag and Kizaru does what's right and chooses the path of his own this time, no longer waiting on the orders of the government.